Some people feel anxious their entire lives and never figure out why. They have tried meditation, journaling, therapy, exercise, every supplement, and still, there's this background hum of unease that never fully goes away. Their doctor says their blood work is fine. Their therapist says it is generalized anxiety. But what if the answer is not in their life at all? What if the explanation sits inside their cells, written in a biological code that was not written by them, but by something that happened to their grandparent 50 years before they were born? Here is the claim that sounds impossible. Your anxiety might not be yours, not in a metaphorical way, but in a literal biological way. The trauma your grandparents survived may have left chemical marks on their DNA that were copied into your parents' DNA and then into yours. These marks change how your stress genes function. They alter your cortisol levels. They make your body more reactive to threat, more prone to hypervigilance, all from an event you never experienced in a time before you existed. This is called epigenetic trauma transmission. Epigenetic means above genetics. It does not change your DNA sequence, but it changes which genes are turned on or off. Think of your DNA as a massive instruction manual. Epigenetics is the highlighter pen that marks which instructions your cells should read and which to skip. When something overwhelmingly stressful happens, war, famine, abuse, genocide, the highlighter marks change. And those changed marks can be passed from parent to child, like a bookmark that survives the transfer to a new edition. Here is what this means in practice. Your body has a stress response system controlled by genes that regulate cortisol, the primary stress hormone. Normally, cortisol spikes when you face a real threat, then drops back down when the threat passes. But when epigenetic marks alter these stress genes, the system misfires. Cortisol stays too low between threats, then overshoots when something triggers you. You overreact to small stressors and under-recover from big ones. This is not a character flaw. This is a biological system calibrated to a world of extreme danger. Except that world was your ancestors. Not yours. The most famous evidence for this came from Dr. Rachel Yehuda at Mount Sinai. She studied the children of Holocaust. Survivors, people whose parents had lived through one of the most extreme traumas in history. The children, particularly those whose parents had PTSD, had significantly lower cortisol levels than control groups, and their DNA showed different patterns of methylation on the FKBP5 gene related to stress regulation. The low cortisol was linked to parental PTSD, not just to having survived the Holocaust. These were people who had never been in a concentration camp, but their bodies carried the biological signature of their parents' trauma, as if their stress system had been pre-configured for a dangerous world. And this is not limited to one population. Similar epigenetic patterns have been found in people prenatally exposed to famine. The Dutch hunger winter of 1944, where individuals whose mothers starved during pregnancy showed altered DNA methylation on the IGF-2 gene 6 decades later. Emerging research in communities that survived genocide in Rwanda and Cambodia is beginning to reveal epigenetic effects, though this work is still early. The Holocaust and Dutch famine studies provide the most direct evidence, while research on other populations is promising but preliminary. The pattern is consistent. Severe collective trauma appears to leave measurable biological marks that survive the generational transfer. So how does this happen at the molecular level? When a person experiences severe trauma, their body floods with stress hormones. These activate enzymes that attach small chemical tags called methyl groups to specific locations on DNA. This is called DNA methylation. These methyl groups act like on-off switches for nearby genes. When the switches are flipped on stress-related genes, the stress response changes. Here is the critical part. When this person reproduces, some of these epigenetic marks survive the massive reprogramming that normally wipes the slate clean between generations. The marks that survive get copied into the embryo's DNA, and the child is born with a stress system already tilted toward vigilance and reactivity. If you are someone who has always felt like your anxiety does not make sense, like your reaction to everyday stress is disproportionate to what is happening, this research might explain something you have never been able to put into words. You have probably been told to just calm down or stop overthinking. You might have blamed yourself for being too sensitive. But if your stress genes were epigenetically modified before you were born, then your anxiety is not a personal failure. It is a biological inheritance. Your body is running a program written for a world of extreme danger. It just does not know that world is not the one you are living. One of the most counterintuitive findings is that descendants of trauma survivors often have lower baseline cortisol, not higher. You would think inherited trauma means constantly elevated stress hormones, but the pattern is more complex. The system adapts to chronic stress by dialing down baseline cortisol to protect the body from constant flooding. But this makes the system less flexible. When a real stressor hits, the cortisol response is either blunted or wildly excessive. This paradox explains why descendants might feel numb and exhausted most of the time, but then get completely overwhelmed by small triggers. It is a system that lost its calibration range. The biological inheritance is only half the story. Trauma also changes how people parent. A parent whose stress system is epigenetically altered is more likely to be hypervigilant, overprotective, emotionally reactive, or shut down, not because they are a bad parent, but because their biology drives behaviors they may not be aware of. Their child grows up receiving both the biological inheritance through DNA and the behavioral inheritance through daily interactions. The two layers reinforce each other. The child's altered stress system makes them more sensitive to the parent's stress signals, creating a feedback loop that deepens the pattern with each generation. If you are skeptical, and you should be, you should know that in 2023, a landmark study published in the journal Cell demonstrated that DNA methylation can be transmitted from parents to offspring across multiple generations. The study was conducted in mice, but it provided the most direct experimental evidence that epigenetic marks can survive the reprogramming between generations. In humans, the evidence comes primarily from observational studies like Yehuda's Holocaust research and the Dutch hunger winter. Some scientists argue that human studies cannot fully separate epigenetic inheritance from genetic, cultural, and environmental transmission. The marks are real. The associations are real, but whether they represent true epigenetic inheritance in humans remains debated. What is not debated is that descendants of trauma show real biological differences in their stress systems. Before we go further, let us be clear about what this does not mean. Epigenetic trauma transmission does not mean you are doomed. It does not mean your fate is sealed by your ancestors' suffering. It does not mean every anxious person has inherited trauma. Anxiety has many causes, and epigenetics is just one. And it absolutely does not mean you should blame your parents or grandparents, who were themselves victims of a biological process they had no control over. What it does mean is that if you have been struggling with anxiety that does not respond to the usual approaches, there might be a biological reason. Understanding that reason is not about blame. It is about finally having the right map for the territory you have been navigating blind. Now, here is the most important part. Epigenetic marks are not permanent. Unlike genetic mutations, which change the DNA code itself and are essentially fixed, epigenetic marks are more like software settings. They can be updated. Your DNA sequence is hardware. Your epigenetic marks are software. And software can be rewritten. Research has shown that positive experiences, therapy, supportive relationships, mindfulness, exercise, even certain medications, can gradually reverse harmful epigenetic marks. Your body is not stuck with the settings it inherited. The marks can change. The calibration can be restored. The system can learn a new baseline. The single most powerful force for reversing the effects of inherited trauma is safe, consistent, emotionally attuned relationship. Research on earned secure attachment shows that people who form even one deeply trusting relationship with a partner, a therapist, a close friend, begin to show measurable changes in their stress biology, including cortisol regulation and emotional reactivity. While the direct epigenetic mechanism is still being studied, the principle is grounded in neuroscience. The same biological pathways shaped by experience can be reshaped by new experiences. Being seen, understood, and not abandoned helps recalibrate the stress response. This is measurable biology. Specific practices have been associated with epigenetic changes that may help reverse inherited stress. Mindfulness meditation, including MBSR programs, has been associated with changes in DNA methylation on genes involved in inflammation and stress response, though research is still emerging. Yoga and breathwork activate the parasympathetic nervous system, counteracting the hypervigilant state that epigenetic trauma reinforces. Body scanning and interoceptive training help you detect early physical signals of stress before they escalate, giving you a window to intervene that descendants of trauma often lack. The key insight: because epigenetic marks respond to the biochemical environment in your cells, anything that changes your stress, chemistry creates an opportunity for marks to shift. Traditional talk therapy alone may not be enough to shift epigenetic marks, because these marks operate below the level of conscious thought. They are encoded in your physiology, not just your narrative. This is why body-based and trauma-focused therapies like EMDR, somatic experiencing, and trauma-focused CBT are particularly promising for inherited trauma. Early research has found DNA methylation changes following trauma-focused psychotherapies, though this evidence is still preliminary. These approaches work directly with the nervous system, helping it complete stress cycles that were interrupted and reprocess threat signals stuck in the on position. If your anxiety has a biological root, you need approaches that speak the language your body understands: sensation, movement, and rhythm. There is a profound shift when you understand epigenetic trauma transmission. You stop seeing yourself as broken and start seeing yourself as adapted. Your nervous system did not malfunction. It adapted to signals it received before you were born. Your hypervigilance is not a defect. It is a survival mechanism calibrated for extreme danger. Your difficulty relaxing is not weakness. It is a body that learned the world was not safe before you had any evidence of your own, This reframing does not make the anxiety disappear, but it removes the second layer of suffering, the shame, the self-blame, the endless cycle of, why can't I just be normal? You are not failing at being calm. Your body is succeeding at protecting you. It is just protecting you from a threat that no longer exists. Understanding epigenetic trauma also changes how you think about healing. If trauma marks can be passed down, then healing marks could be passed down too. When you do the work of therapy, of building safe relationships, of regulating your nervous system, you're not just helping yourself. You may be changing the epigenetic marks your children will inherit. While direct proof of transgenerational healing in humans is still lacking, the principle is biologically plausible. If the same mechanisms that transmit trauma respond to environmental signals, then positive changes in your stress biology could be transmitted as well. The healing you do today might not end with you. It could echo forward into people who do not exist yet. You are not just a recipient of inherited trauma. You are a potential transmitter of inherited healing. If any of this resonates with you, here are 3 things you can do right now. First, stop blaming yourself for anxiety that may not have originated with you. The shame of I should be able to handle this is itself a stressor that keeps the epigenetic marks active. Second, seek out body-based approaches. If talk therapy has not worked, it might be because the problem lives below the level of language. EMDR, somatic therapy, and breathwork speak directly to the nervous system. Third, build one relationship where you feel completely safe. Not mostly safe, completely safe. The kind of safety where your body can finally lower its guard. That safety is not just emotionally comforting. It is biologically transformative. You inherited a story that started before you were born. The question is, will you be the one who changes how it ends? The science of epigenetic trauma transmission tells us something devastating and something hopeful in the same breath. Devastating, because it means suffering can echo across generations through our biology. Hopeful, because it means healing can echo too. Your ancestors survived something terrible and their survival left marks on you. But you have something they did not, the knowledge that those marks exist and the tools to change them. The trauma was inherited. The healing is a choice. And that choice starts now.